7:05 p.m. Thank you everyone for your patience. I'm going to call this Monday, February 3rd meeting of the Waterbury Selectboard to order. Our first item is to approve the agenda. We have noted that we are planning to remove consent agenda item A. There is a warrant agenda item B, which is a special event permit. We also have printed in front of us additional potential items for the consent agenda, including a second-class liquor license for Woodstock Farmers Market, a first-class commercial caterer, first-class restaurant bar license, and outside consumption permit for Stowe Street Cafe LLC. Oops, sorry, the first-class commercial list with Farmhouse Flowers LLC. Board members have that in front of them. Otherwise, I don't think there's any changes other than noting that the potential action at 9:45 may be discussion, but we actually don't anticipate public action at that time. All that said, is there any motions with regards to the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda amended to reflect the removal of item A from the consent agenda and the addition of a first-class restaurant bar license and an outside consumption permit for Stowe Street Cafe. Am I getting that right?
Yep, you could also add the Woodstock Farmers Market second class
And the Woodstock Farmers Market second-class license
and Farmhouse Flowers.
and Farmhouse Flowers.
That's commercial caterer.
All those amendments, I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second? Long motion by Kane, second by Roger. Any further discussion on the agenda? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Tom, could you please let folks into the Zoom? Thank you.
Are we recording?
Yes.
All right. So with that, we have the next item, which is the consent agenda. Again, now beginning with item B as warned, the approval of the special events permit manufacturer for Snow Farm Winery, the second class for Woodstock Farmers Market, first class and outside consumption for Stowe Street LLC, and first class commercial caterer for Farmhouse Flowers. Is there a motion with regards to the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Motion by Kane, second by Mike. Any questions on the consent agenda? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. That brings us to the public. This portion of the agenda is for anything that was not on the warned agenda. So if you want to speak on the topic of anything that you see on the printed agenda, feel free to wait until that item, but this would otherwise be 3 minutes of comment for anything not already on the agenda. Is there anyone who wants to speak on public comment? Yeah, please come on up and just state your name. We'd love to have you come up to the table because it helps with the audio for the folks online.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
I'm Caleb Ainsworth. And grew up here. Now I have a home, a business, and a family here. And it's kind of two parts, but I guess our concern is my child is now in Brookside Primary School. And especially in the afternoons at pickup time, the traffic, not the congestion of traffic, the quality of the driving has gotten scary. People aren't stopping for stop signs. Me holding my child have been like foot into the street and stop for a car that doesn't even look at the crosswalk and was flying by. We had video last week of a car that literally passed us. And then the car in front of them started to turn right into school. The school bus started to go. The school bus had to stop because the person behind the car is passing both of them in the other lane. Just a lot of poor driving, illegal driving, dangerous driving. We reached out to the state police. They basically gave us the answer. They don't have time, but they do their best to look into it. And we've seen no police at all. And we're not asking like for arrests or even tickets. We're just like a presence, you know, like just keep people in check a little bit. So first part is just that straight fact of what can we possibly do to make people, you know, mind the laws better, especially during that time. I know it gets congested down there, but it's literally only like a half hour to 45 minutes. The traffic gets plugged up and people, I guess, are just in too much of a hurry to wait. But things I feel have gotten actually dangerous. I witnessed it myself. My wife picks our kid up a lot more. We park down the street and walk up in just a little ways, and it's just insane to see what people do. And so sort of the second point to that is we also feel like the police presence wasn't a lot to ask for if we have police officers designated to our town on duty. So if they're not able to sit down there, where are they at this point? And are they still fulfilling the, you know, whatever we consider a special interest to Waterbury that we all have on our tax bills and things like that. I guess those are the two things. A, if there's any way we can concern that, just the driving in general, and if the police could, like, even if they just park there, you know, just make people question it again. I mean, they're like not even slowing down for the stop sign between the railroad and Union. It's just bizarre. And then also just the second kind of part, that where are the police? I've actually also had a couple other incidents, which might be on the agenda. I own a piece of property on Route 2 that tenants have complained, and we definitely pro police. I'm happy that they're around, but I feel like it's sort of been a lack of presence, and I don't know why.
Anyone on the board have anything to share? I'd say in general, thank you for the comments. We manage them in general through Tom reaching out and certainly inform them of hotspots in certain areas. So thanks for that.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Mike?
I can just, Caleb, I agree with you. Just a lot of times, especially if I'm a little late, to go to a Rotary meeting at 7:30. I'm just appalled with the number. I don't think, parents don't let their kids walk to school anymore, and I think that's part of the problem. There are just way too many parents trying to get kids to school, and I don't disagree. It's probably something that we could probably speak to the lieutenant and to say, you know, just have, even if they had the flashing lights there once every couple of weeks, that's gonna probably calm things down.
Exactly. Just a little presence to make people, you know, remember that they are driving, you know, obey the road laws, and obviously when the lights are flashing for the school zone, it's, you know, pay a little bit more attention and watch out for all the kids. It's just, I don't want to see it get to an accident when it's just, we can stop it before that happens. It would be much better. Yeah.
Other folks who would like to speak on public comment?
I just,
Come on up, say your name, say your 3 minutes.
Caleb called me and asked me about it, and I said, well, you're welcome to come to the select board. I encourage you to. And maybe you can answer this, Tom. He said that they had a crosswalking guard, but he passed away and nobody stood in that position. Is that the school's responsibility to provide that?
They've historically done it. I'm not sure it's their responsibility. I just know they've done it.
Yeah. And he also mentioned to me, and I think he mentioned to you, that Randall Street and Union Street, they're not even stopping for those stop signs. Streets are, no. And I don't know, the police department, to his point. You know, we've heard comments, I've heard comments from people like, where are they? Don't see them around at all. I'm sure they're out there doing something. And I know because they're such short staff that they've cut down the scope in which they're dealing with these days. A lot of them is speeding and other issues like that, but I'm wondering if running a stop sign might be a little bit more egregious.
So, man,
Yep, go ahead.
do we think it might be worth looking into for, like speed cameras? Just to look at it, see what that would cost us.
Don't believe those are legal in Vermont.
I don't know.
It's my understanding that I can. Last time I asked the question, I was told that there's a state constitutional issue. There's a privacy issue because if you're driving past a camera that's getting the license plate information, it's getting everyone's license plate information, whether you're committing a crime or not. And then there are issues with how that interacts with the state Valcor system, which is their sort of state police and all the local police departments database. I can tell you, when I worked in St. Albans, we had a license plate reader mounted on the vehicle, which was strictly for patrolling the areas that were marked for, wanting to parking, and we were told to stop doing it.
I guess the other note I would just say next on our agenda is like, we can thing that's gonna touch on police presence. It's been something across all, and though it doesn't look like it, downtown transportation fund, though not in this particular location, also plays for looking at traffic calming and safety. So just to say those, if you want to stay tuned tonight.
It's really honestly, I mean, people should mind me. 2-3 o'clock, and it's really 2:15 to 2:45, but just in that spot, I mean, the morning's a little bad too, but it seems like it's worse in the afternoon. And again, the congestion's a little bit, whatever, but it's really the people that get upset about it and then floorboarded after that are gonna become the biggest part of it.
Well, perhaps the Stowe Street Bridge closing this year will help things for a little while.
That's true, I didn't think about that here.
Any other comments on public forum? Anything that's not on the agenda? I think that's Tom's cursor. Tom, would you mind just moving after sure? All right, take two. Anyone online for public forum? Now is your chance. You can unmute yourself. Oh, thanks. Go ahead.
I just want to thank all the folks from Winterfest. I thought Winterfest was highly successful. The events were well attended. I think a lot of people had fun, and I think it's I kind of like the idea that it shrunk in terms of number of days. I think it's much more manageable, and I think the events are well attended, with the exception of the freezing cold weather, which only the man upstairs could prevent that. But I think some of the events, you can put us sailing. My wife would love the ice disco and stuff like that. And there was everyone I hear from is good events. So thanks for all the organizers on Winterfest, and we hope it stays around. Hopefully it was financially successful.
Any other public forum comments? All right, I will move us to our next agenda item, which is Route 2 Neighborhood Public Safety. This is something that came to our attention with some resident feedback at a prior meeting, and there's been some subsequent follow-up since, so we wanted to put it back on the agenda to revisit. I don't know, Tom or Roger, if you want to speak to any of the follow-up.
Yeah, I'll just say that I wanted to thank our legislative representatives for calling the meeting in the library a couple of months ago in response to a number of complaints from residents along Route 2 about ongoing habitual disturbances, and we received a lot of good testimony on what was going on there, and the state's attorney, Michelle Donnelly, came to the meeting, and towards the end of the meeting suggested that if residents wanted to submit victim impact statements, that was something that might be able to help her achieve a stronger prosecution of habitual offenders. And just so I thought it was worth putting it back on the agenda to get an update as to what the situation, if the situation was evolved at all, or changed at all, and then see what the town might be able to do to help build that portfolio of victim impact statements to help ameliorate the situation.
Tom, do you have anything you want to add on this?
No, not a lot. In the end, he tried to press the state's attorney's office over any other strategies out there. Some of us have read about the habitual offender statute. In the end, she simply said the victim impact statements are the way to go, and if they just keep documenting, we'll help their report.
And is it correct that you've also offered if your support as a municipal staffer would be useful in drafting any of those, that you would be happy to assist with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Is there anyone else who wants to speak to this?
I can honestly say that it seems to have.
Do you mind
slowed
coming
down.
up? It's only for the folks online. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
It seems to have slowed down a lot. It seems to have slowed down a lot during the winter months. I don't see the traffic as much as I do. But I also don't see, Bishop's Place being plowed out or traffic in and out of there. With Sean Cummings. I don't know what's going on there. I've seen a couple people in and out of there over the past month, but. Everything's pretty much slowed down. His truck hasn't been cleaned off the snow in a month. And I don't know if he's in rehab or. I haven't seen it. Things have calmed down. I just. Anticipate what's gonna happen, it's like. Make the offer. Their gas engine down there, he was walking from what's now car, trailer out. He'd be walking. His weather. Flip flops, shorts and a t-shirt and back and forth in the shop. And I heard he went down to Bishop's after they got him out of there. And supposedly somebody tried to break in and he ended up disarming them and holding them and took the police from it. I don't believe that anybody tried to break in. I think that this would be somewhat. There are firearms involved down there. See what the spring brings. Right now, they're gonna be driving across it, but it's long, like they were last fall. But let's see what the spring brings. That's all I was here for. Some sort of feedback with what's going on.
Yeah, we appreciate
All right,
it.
thank you.
Mind if I just have a quick question?
Yeah.
Have you written the victim impact statement, you know, if the neighbors have?
I don't know if they have, I've got a list of things that I've watched go on and called state police and. They never tell me. I mean, I literally watched one Sunday morning when I let my dog out. And was standing in the front door and heard help. You saw 3 people coming out from the Haskins place over there. And they all squatted down on the ground and I actually saw one pick up an arm and let go of it and went back down to the ground. I called the police.
So at the meeting last year, a number of people said that they weren't getting any answers to their calls. It wasn't that the state police were saying we're on other calls, they just weren't getting answers. Has that changed?
I haven't placed any calls recently because as I said, when months things have slowed down. I did not see any foot traffic up and down the road. That I have seen. I gotta say it's slowed down right now. I don't know if it's gone south, but it's winter. Come back in the spring. We can only wait and see.
Did any kind of here, was she able to purchase?
Yes. Yes, her boyfriend, about the fiance or whatever they are. She bought the place out there. They was stripping the trailer, cleaning it out, they take it. And we afford to. Dump trailers. Whole trash out there. Got a lot of stuff running out back, push down back to the factory. And then all the trash they were throwing out there, we had bears in our yard.
Yeah, it was a complete mess. I was actually unaware, which I was, which is my own. You know, lack of knowledge about the meeting that had happened, and I own a property. 2 doors down from what used to be this property where a lot of us comes and only 5 or 6 doors down from where the problems, I believe, sort of still exist. So I would ask my tenants about those forms. I was aware of that. So we have 2 duplexes, 4 units sitting right there. And I've called the cops, the police a few times on their behalf when they call me because people are in the backyard and like. One of my nice tenants, she's sitting on a front porch in the evening, her kid's in bed, she's reading a book, and somebody popped out of the bushes right next to her and just scared her to death. And they were luckily just on their way through, either back to their car or running from the police. I'm not sure what they were doing, but
I'm over the interstate fence in my backyard.
yeah,
It is in front of me. Well, I just had an accident going over to my friend's house over here. use the phone. I got a phone here, now I'll go over there, walking right there, walk right down the road to Bishop's.
And
So,
yeah, Greg seems to, last I saw, which is not very long ago, from asking that emissions.
Yeah, but I've noticed there hasn't been a lot of, in the snow, there hasn't been a lot of footprints in and out, there hasn't been a lot of plowing around the vehicles. They were driving around the back of the trailers for a while, early in the fall.
and I live in Waterbury, but a little closer to Richmond than that, and I drove by on my way here tonight, the state police officers were actually at Joe Bishop's house, which was in the telephone, so the flashlight was looking in the window towards the building. I didn't see anybody else home, and that has nothing to do with that. I don't have much information, but I'll reach back out to you because this is top of mind for me. I do agree with Gary that it has seemed to have calmed down, but they were also racing vehicles in the middle of the night up and down public road and again.
And I was driving across lawns and
And we put up, no trespassing signs and that, obviously. It gives us a little bit more of a leg up if we ever end up in court, but other than that, it doesn't even slow them down.
Kane?
Our friends from Route 2 are not the only people I've heard from in the last couple weeks. When speaking about the police, just simply say, where are they? And that comment is usually swiftly followed by, don't we pay for that? So I think this gives way to a broader conversation about what we're paying for. When it comes to the police presence, I understand they're short staffed. I understand that they're stretched to the brim, especially with the amount of officers in Washington County. But I think it would probably be some good to speak with VSP leadership again, just to understand when they are in Waterbury. And if we have a schedule of when the police officers here, and folks under the 2 know exactly when to call. They see something, we know a police officer is going to be in Waterbury. I think it would go a long way to this point.
Keep on contacting the state's attorney. I know I was on a WDEV radio call-in show, and Chief Murad from Burlington was on, called in. And, I said, I'm tired of everywhere. It's here, it's Burlington, I call it catch and release policing. It's
I told the state's attorney that, that's sufficient.
they catch them and they release, and they release them and they're still doing it.
And based on conditions that they don't pay any attention to.
I know our, corrections facilities are jammed up and stuff like that. But especially, I mentioned about the person in Burlington they've had 1,800 interactions.
I'm gonna push us a little to stay on Waterbury since
Okay,
neighborhood
but-
safety was the agenda.
Right, but that was, where I spoke to Chief Murad, it's like, we're getting the same thing. You have people who in Waterbury who brought in on charges and nothing happens. So to me, the root of it, and I think that the police are frustrated too. And because they don't like keep on doing the same old with no results. And we need to let these elected state attorneys and the attorney general know we're tired. And, until enough people start making a big deal over it, nothing's gonna happen. I hate to say that, but we do need to keep on, putting pressure on by having people contact the state's attorneys, the attorney general, because this is becoming a real problem.
Roger?
Yeah, I was at this meeting, over in the library, and what I witnessed was that, we had, both Lieutenant Howard and the state's attorney there. She didn't show up till a bit late, but, nevertheless, she was there. And it seemed to me like they actually were finding a path to work together to try to get some resolution and, increase the evidence that would weigh on, getting these folks put away for a certain amount of time. So, I think it while there are certainly problems with the system, no one's gonna dispute that. And I think it's in our best interest to look at the positive side, what can happen. And she has asked us to help with the impact statements. And so I think, anyone that's willing to step forward and submit some of that will be willing to help get that submitted to someplace where it's going to be submitted.
So when you talk to the lieutenant, and I'm sure he would be very diplomatic about it, I think the question would be, are your services being required elsewhere? You know, short in this, in the town of Waterbury, and to think about adding more police protection or having our own police department, I think based on what we're seeing, police departments throughout the state, that would be a legal attempts to try to structure our own police department, just from the staff and whether or not we'd be able to hang on the staff very long would be the next question. You all know that my cousin died as a result of the activity that went on because he frequented that place down on Route 2 several times. When it sounded dead in his home, due to that problem down there. I see Teresa walk in here earlier. I'm kind of glad that she showed up here. What troubles me the most about these issues, these drug problems, is the fact that they're so detrimental to our communities. It's hard for me to believe that there isn't more consideration at our state level as to the impacts of this problem and why, why they're not, and maybe they are, maybe they're finally starting to recognize that this is destroying our communities and need to take a serious look at some serious clamping down on this problem. And for what it's worth, based on what I've seen in the last couple of days, the new administration in Washington, D.C. seems hell bent on putting an end to this drug problem in this country. So we'll see. I'm hoping that he's extremely successful in stopping the inflow of these drugs into this country. That's a big step in the right direction.
Anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak, want to speak on this? I guess just to state and clarify for Tom, so we contract for 80 hours a week of police covered. Our police officers, recognizing that there is training and leave and some things built into that, which can create inconsistencies. And last we had them in, I think we heard they have something like 15 of 19 positions filled in the Washington County Barracks. So just to be candid with everyone here, as the last time we've inquired. So, again, we were contracted for the 2 full-time positions, and recognize that, if there's overriding concerns in the county, those folks may not be.
Problems that arise down there usually occur between 9 and 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and state police on. Get a phone call. Phone call. Morrisville,
Right.
all the way down here.
Yeah. Thank you. No, hearing the hours, and again, I'm just.
Yeah.
Relaying what we have heard of late, and I think I'm hearing from the board that there's. No continuing to acknowledge that we're paying for the service, and we want to make sure we're. Receiving the best service that we can for it, so that's likely going to be a next step for us. To reiterate, Tom Lights, the manager, has agreed to be a point of contact, so if there are lab or vacant connections today, again. Tenants or impacted folks interested in doing victim impact statements. You have the guidance from the state's attorney around what that should look like. So happy to help folks with that. Anyone else on the board have comments around next steps or other items? So thank you folks, especially for coming in and sharing firsthand. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, any other items on this? Right, I will move us to our next item, which is the Natural Disaster Preparedness Handbook Review. This has been in the parking lot for a while, so excited that we've been able to move it out. Several of us have printouts, it's a tome. I know we have, the chair of the Natural Disaster. Secretary, thank you, he keeps hopping around present, so if you want to come up, you're more than welcome. Thanks, Teresa.
Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Matt Dugan. Secretary of the committee, and Payne in an email recently would come and present this to you. And I don't really know exactly what present means. I know you all have a copy, so I couldn't get away with just giving you a physical copy. Therefore, I guess I have to give you the clip notes, which I have prepared. So I'm going to start with an assumption, and I promise I'm not being sarcastic here. I'm starting the assumption that you've all read. What did you call it? A handbook? It's a manual. You called it even something smaller than that. It's beefy.
I said tome, I thought that was a lot, but you know.
You did pick up the tome. I should acknowledge that. No, I'm just kidding on. So, but if you haven't read it,
Yes.
that's fine. My presentation here is relatively brief and summative, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So to start, the background, it was written both for those experienced in flood disaster response and those who have no experience at all. Despite the fact that we've asked for and received wonderful feedback on the document, we still consider it a living document that will undergo revision as experienced voices step up and tell us things. We as a committee are open to that on an ongoing basis. We want to hear from people about how we can create the optimal recovery. In the preface, we explain the goals of the document and its perspective as well. I'll just talk about those for a second. So regarding goals, the manual contains a lot of lists, the tasks and items and forms that are needed to optimally prepare for and respond to flood disasters. While many supplies and tasks will be identical in the case of other natural disasters, we started with flooding for obvious reasons, and we will be discussing the other natural disaster preparedness committee. We will be discussing making this recommendations regarding other natural disasters in the future. So we haven't ceased that at all. So the other part regarding perspective, this manual leans heavily on the point of view of the volunteer doing cleanup. Not volunteers doing the management of the operation or the folks who work with FEMA or the more administrative end of disaster response and recovery. There are two reasons for this perspective. The first is that cleanup is the area of recovery with which we are most familiar as a committee. There's a lot of firsthand experience with that. The second is almost upon us. It's not exactly in that title, but we need to build up a really robust volunteer force who are willing, able, prepared, and trained to step forward in the event of future natural disasters. Therefore, our overriding concern is what we call the care and feeding of our volunteers. Because if we don't recruit and train and care for them properly, we won't have a response effort. And response is everything when there's water. In particular, it's quicker to get it out, but it's the image. The document has been reviewed by Tom and also by crew, and they've commented, and we've incorporated all of their suggestions, and we've explained ourselves where we don't agree with suggestions. But about 98% of the material is now in the revised document. As for the next steps for our committee, we see two. First, we understand that the town is currently hiring for the position of natural disaster preparation and response coordinator. Second, as a committee, we will begin to take on tasks mostly in the communication realm that the document refers to. So for instance, assembling disaster preparation and response content for the town's website, developing communication to build and maintain and alert the volunteer corps. So our committee's plate will be full for quite some time carrying out the various invitations. So, lastly, this is not in the manual, but to wrap up here, we see our role as advising and supporting the new disaster preparation and response coordinator, working in a partnership and learning together as we seek to develop the optimal response to future natural disasters. It's a relationship we absolutely look forward to. And equipping this person with the processes and resources necessary for the recruitment and maintenance of the volunteer corps will be a large part of this support. So that's going to be ongoing the way we see it. Of course, it's up to you all to decide we should be doing something a little bit different than that, but that's what we're landing. So that said, any questions I can answer? But
Thank you so much. I guess I'll just start off by acknowledging the work of the committee. Just you, but you were heavily involved, but truly thanks to all of you, even have the content to talk about. Questions from any board members? Mike?
I think you did an excellent job on the night. And, the biggest criticism I have is, and I'm sure the committee knows this, is really near almost 95% of flooding.
yes,
And there are potential, you know, we've seen out west wildfires,
yes.
you know. You could potentially, we're wetter climate, we don't have the dry shrubs that they do out west, so it probably won't be, but there are, and the odds of us having an earthquake or some other thing are probably fairly low. But
We're not like Maine, that crazy place.
well, you are, but even that, the damage was fairly minor.
Yeah, well, we did have, as you recall, a drought in the fall. We were literally thinking about that. In Massachusetts, it was much more dire than here, and they had wildfires in Mass. So, yeah, absolutely.
That's the one thing that I don't think we may even think about too much. Some of these other potential disasters, we think flooding, because it's been upon us, in the last, 12, 13, 14 years, whatever it's been since 2011. And I think, good job. I think there's also, maybe there needs to be something that works the coordination between the emergency management director and. But overall, I think, it's a good job and step by step in what's mostly for flood protection.
Yeah, if our next natural disaster isn't a flood, we're just gonna be so disappointed.
No, we're already getting that.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
That's my comment.
Other questions from us, Robert?
I'd like to second Mike, saying that, we're really thrilled to have this, completed and appreciate all the work that you put into it. In terms of the preparedness, part, you go into, the assessment of, the different houses and, how quickly that can be done. I was wondering, whether, it would make any sense to assess the houses that are in the vulnerable households pre-flood, to see if they have removed all the junk from their basements, they have moved their utilities on. Some of the recommendations that are in this, so that you knew in advance which were the houses that would be relatively easy to just pump out, and others that were going to require a more complicated recovery process.
Yeah, I guess I would answer that not directly, but I'm not avoiding it. That we consider it's part of that communication issue first. And we also are trying to make sure we co-develop whatever we do with the crew, so that we're not stepping on their toes. Because they're interested in some of those same issues. We're both very sensitive to it and aware of it, and would like to figure out how, I guess, specifically, how can we help? I'll give you an example. The volunteer corps could be used to help people move things out of their basements and garages in completely dry times. Building volunteer corps first and then getting that message out there is part of that process. As far as the sort of the GIS floodplain physical assessment of in danger a particular home is, it's a little beyond our skill set. But it's, I mean, it's a great thing to work with.
Well, no, I acknowledge, like, just, this past year, we had a flood that was completely different from the flood of, 2023. Which was mostly inundation, and that seems reasonably predictable based on elevations. Whereas, in 2024, you had all the sheet erosion coming straight down off the hills.
Right.
Which affected a bunch of places up in the center as well as other communities. Yeah, so. Well, I get that challenge, but I just thought that might be something that could be added in, as you say, it's a living document, and just as a way to have a better target as to what to expect.
Could you mind sort of summarizing that again, because I don't take a note on it. I mean, it's such a broad topic. For instance, we've talked with the UVM as well, and some of their GIS and flooding type people. There's various resources out there. What part of that are you most interested in investing?
I'd say targeting the vulnerable businesses and households. And then doing a preliminary assessment to determine how much more work needs to be done.
Yeah.
To prepare them for an eventual flood.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that.
I think Kane was first, and then
There was a lot of discussion in meetings with the committee about where town responsibility ended and personal responsibility began. And I think that question falls into that discussion. Especially with people in vulnerable areas, haven't been hit 3 times. People in the hinterlands now know what it's like to flood. And then there are parts of the manual that kind of go into it, but not, it's not in depth. But I do think erring on the side of what is a property owner's responsibility versus what we can do for them, what is feasible for us to do for property owners. And I would worry about sending teams out or getting volunteers sent out pre-floods to inspect homes. How many homes want to be inspected by the government?
Yeah. No, very long, unfortunately, I get that part. But I think, just what is the prescribed communication with those vulnerable households? Have they received this information about, like, here's, you've got all the list of the prescribed activities in there. I'm just wondering, have those households received this yet, or is that part of them?
It's a great suggestion. There are a lot of things that haven't figured them all out yet. We don't even know necessarily everything that needs to be done. But Kane is absolutely correct. We've had a lot of these conversations about where does the homeowner's responsibility end, where's the town's responsibility end, where does the disaster preparedness response volunteer effort begin and end, and those are just good conversations. I mean, you don't have to be highly experienced to walk into a property if they want to be there and say, okay, well, your utilities are not located high enough. You know, these are things here's your 5-year plan if you don't have the money to do this tomorrow. And by the way, you should move these things, or they should be at least put in watertight plastic, that kind of thing. I could foresee if we get the volunteer corps properly built up, having that just an ongoing service. I certainly wouldn't mind doing that once in a while myself, just going to somebody's house, and I'm no expert. I've just seen a lot of things in my life, so I know what not to do.
Yeah.
But yeah,
No, I appreciate that, I think everyone recognizes I live on Randall Street, I personally have removed all the stuff out of my basement, or almost all that stuff. And moved the utilities up and that sort of thing, I started paying attention, but. I hear about it more than the average resident.
Right.
And then I've got neighbors who have got 3 kids, can't afford to sacrifice the basement because that's where the kids do all the kid stuff. And so just, it might help to know, like, okay, 4 Randall Street, its basement is clear. 8 Randall Street, it's still got finished basement, and we're gonna have a different situation.
oh, so you're talking about sort of a list where we have an idea from the triage perspective.
Yeah, again, maybe this is out of line, but what I'm suggesting is that there are a limited number of households that are actually located within the floodplain. And I can name a bunch of them off of like my 10 fingers, but to know in advance what the situation is might be really helpful when the flood comes, and these 3 have clear basements and are gonna be ready to be pumped out right away. Those have a bunch of junk in the basement, and that's gonna be more of a challenging situation.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've been dovetailing on both Roger and. I think it's a real problem with folks. I agree with Roger in terms of elevating, utilities and stuff like that. But too many people, especially in this day and age, with how much the cost of trash disposal for them, too much stuff winds up going in. Because they can't afford to get rid of it. And I don't know if there's some way that we could work with the solid waste management district on maybe having some sort of, a discount or, even if it was really a financial hardship, I don't have a problem with the town in some way, shape or form assisting in some sort of recycling / trash removal, because I think that's half the battle. Having all the stuff, anyone who has stuff in the basement, it becomes a lot more of a pain than if you have a, empty basement, your utilities are up. Hopefully we'll have more minor things where they'll have water, you pump it out and, you mop it up and it's pretty much a done deal. It's when there's all that stuff that winds up becoming a problem. And for some people, it's a financial, I know Roger may think, well, everyone has to have their kids' stuff in the thing, but I think also people we're a society of too much junk. And people have too much stuff in their houses, and it winds up being in the basement, and that's where it's gonna become a problem. And so is there a way to work with, solid waste management district on maybe assisting some of these residents who have financial hardships?
There might be, they're pretty limited budget too. So, yeah, assisting the residents means using town tax dollars for the most part. Yeah, I guess also I'll disagree with you in one minor point. You said it's a real problem about all the stuff in the basement. I think it was. I'm not sure it is right now because it's been removed.
Got better, because most of it's not destroyed.
These annual
5
reports
years.
are really helpful.
But over time, people,
Yeah, that's
people have short memories.
Well,
Thanks.
but I also think that the manual does a really good job at explaining what the town's role is. And Mike, you're in personal responsibility. I think there is a level of personal responsibility, even if you live in a floodplain, where we're 3 floods deep. There are resources for you. They might not cover everything, but it still should be something that is on the top of your mind. If you live in an area where the things in your basement will be destroyed eventually by Mother Nature. And so if you need help, there are places to reach out. Of course, Crew is an incredibly helpful resource for things like that. But the manual or the tome has gone a long way to explain what the town's role is.
Roger, how many people on your street, I'll pick on Ranger Street, after all these floods, you think they have some pump, you know, a real water pump to pump out their own basement?
Maybe a quarter of them, but maybe more. I think it's impressive.
One nice thing perhaps, we've had a chance to think about this. Maybe in ways you haven't, which is that, okay, how do we prioritize? Because there are so many things that we could do, we want to do, and we can do that down the road. And for us, the first thing is how do we build up that volunteer flow? Because even if you're going to, for instance, make an income sensitive garbage amnesty day, you know, you're still going to need people to move that stuff. Right. So the nice thing is we get to be a little myopic and think about, all right, how do we get this floor established? Can we even do it? We get 100 people, can we get 50? Can we set up trainings? And then what do we do with these people? So these are real things to think about. When we get those ideas, we generally tend to cycle back to, all right, how do we get the resources first in terms of the people?
I'm raising my own hands, maybe I'll call on myself.
Alyssa, go
I just wanted to second that, I had your 2 proposed next steps for the committee, I just wanted to make sure I understood them. And you see your role in, again, acknowledging that we've hired for this disaster coordinator position, supporting that person, helping with orienting, and then also this communication piece is the other big thing that you all are invested in, is that right? Am I listening?
Yeah, basically, I understand this is not going to be a full-time position and there's just, we understand that there's a lot that needs doing. And I'm scrolling down the way I said it. Yeah, you summed it up. So we're not gonna strand this person, is what we're saying. We figure there's a lot. That we're gonna get to the bottom.
Yeah, I guess on that note, a couple things. One, given this is a living document, do you, I guess in your mind, I didn't see it laid out here, but steps, or processes, that you'd be taking to update this with, you know, the most current knowledge that we have? You know, how do you foresee that? And kind of a second part of that question, would that be the new coordinator's responsibility to update this document? And the third part of that question is, kind of the same idea. I guess one thing I was thinking about when reading through this was, you know, given that natural disaster preparedness, committee and Crew have similar responsibilities, not similar, but overlapping, you said it yourself today. Do you think this document does enough in kind of separating responsibilities for each of those organizations? So again, kind of a 3-part question, the iteration of this document, the new coordinator's role in that, and then the separation of responsibilities.
I may not remember all your questions, but I'll tell you. They're very well put. Let's start with the sort of most amorphous one for me. When we start dealing with the coordinator, to me, this is just the way I manage people and own businesses and manage people and whatever. To me, it's a very organic process. All right, who are you? What are you really good at? What are we good at? Let's establish that human contact there first. So that's how I plan to go into that relationship myself. I can't speak for the committee, but they're very nice people. And the committee, I think they'd probably be similar. So we're gonna learn things about what this person is good at and not so good at. In terms of updating this, we absolutely, we're not even there yet as far as what should we do. We know there are many things that we'll have to. You should have been there for our first few meetings because we had so many big conversations that just kept going around and around and around. And a lot of these things come up and they're all really good things. And so we decided to focus on the manual. And I suppose every time it got started last spring. And was updated pretty significantly. A lot was thrown out as a result of last summer's flood and the new experience. So you could say every time we get a flood, we'll have a new iteration. Sorry for the gallows humor. But no, yes, we looking forward to it. There's more to learn. There are more efficiencies and all kinds of cool stuff that we can figure out. And then there's one more.
Just lastly, the separation responsibility between crew and the natural disaster. I didn't see a lot of outline in here. Maybe this is not the specific place for that. So I just wanted to touch on that. I know crews, obviously gave their comments to this.
Yep. Yeah, and that really breaks down between response and recovery. So think of crew as recovery and think of the natural disaster preparedness training, the volunteer corps as response. So there's that time when the volunteer corps is not going to rush. Let's bring fire. They're not going to rush into put the fire out. But after that, there will be, when it's safe, they will be able to help. And then after that, the crew steps in and does all the brainy work of and the patient work of hooking people up to funding sources. A lot of what we've done so far is to figure out where they want to be and feel they should be and where they feel like they'd like us to be. It's been a good conversation. Yeah, and we'll continue. I actually joined one of their committees partly to get a better idea for, how to step on it. Yeah. And Kane has been super helpful, by the way. So I have to give Kane a shout out in terms of helping us delineate and understand where things go. And that has Tom on the field. So we appreciate what you guys do.
Moving forward, I think it's pertinent that the select board assists in building the volunteer corps. They can't do it alone. They meet once a month or but they have. When we created the committee in 2023, my idea, at least behind it and pitching the idea, was a permanent volunteer corps, and the committee has built the foundation for which to blossom a permanent volunteer corps from. And I think we should do everything in our power to help the committee build it.
Are there any questions or comments? Yeah.
It's kind of a different issue. On page 8, I found it kind of interesting, you have communication with the community in the event of disaster. And I know it mentioned prominently WDEV, and in the case of Irene, they were broadcasting round the clock.
Right.
And I think that's a little bit of because there are still members of the community, radio and TV, and especially if you don't have power, they may not even have a cell. They may have a cell phone, but again, they might not be able to charge it if the disaster lasts a while.
Sure.
But everyone seems to have a little radio with there's a battery somewhere tucked away somewhere that they can listen.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, have we thought, has there been any conversation with the radio station in the event of a disaster that people remotely could run the station, 24 hours?
Not 24 hours. John, Malter has been in touch with them. And, not 24 hour, unfortunately, the whole media-scape's changed since Irene, but there is an understanding, and I don't want to misspeak for John, but there is an understanding that they will be happy to assist during the hours that they're alive DJs there. And my background is media, and I'm very sensitive to the idea that different people rely on different media, right? And so whenever anyone says, oh, no one's on Facebook anymore, or everyone does this, everyone does that, I say, that's just not true. People are, and so we're gonna be looking to narrow the channels so that we can make sure the information, people know where to go. We don't want people to have to go to 20 different places for today. And we're gonna segment that by the types of media, the platforms that people tend to use. So we're gonna both look for what's most popular and channel them there and try to reduce them as much as possible. And DEB, as far as I can tell, is still very much an institution and a community. It's like a pillar of the community. So not all communities have that asset.
Right, we're fairly unique in this sense.
Exactly, yeah. And so why not utilize it if they have to help?
Other items, so in terms of next steps, I think we're hearing that there is a path that the committee is on, as of now, and if, the select board wants to provide direction, otherwise, certainly we can do that at any point, but you all kind of are gonna, keep proceeding forward. I would say, Tom, do we have any applicants for the coordinator position? that's been
Yes,
advertised?
I've interviewed 6 or 7 people. None were applicants, all the people I reached out to, so if you know people in the community who might be interested. List there are. I've got someone who I think would be great at the job. Not available for 4 or 5 months. So nothing to report beyond that. But yes, we know people and you can help me twist some arms. No one said it's the money issue. It's more just time commitments. And it's not even a time commitment during the disaster. When we occur, it's more just time commitments right now.
That pending, still, it sounds like some interesting communication, came starting kind of looking at our role in the select board, considering volunteers. Any other important points to raise in this one?
I'd like to just say, we'll come and visit you anytime you like. Have to say, but keep talking. Wouldn't as a board, because Kane relays your ideas to us, and that's super helpful. It's really advanced things much more quickly than we would have forged ahead with some misconceptions. So
What else are liaisons for,
yeah, but we super appreciate it.
A pitch for roles clarification, I didn't pay him, no, I'm just kidding. Any other public comments or anyone else who wants to speak on this? All right, I will say, somewhat intentionally on the agenda, recognizing that this is, I did have that as handbook on the agenda, so my apologies. The response manual is the if and when we get there piece of it. But I will move us to our next item, which is a brick grant application, thinking of proactive planning. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming in.
Let me just go ahead and get that up to.
All right, we're gonna do some logistical sharing, and I did see that Roy, join the minute.
Redefine.
Yeah, look at this trained professional.
Where is it? Where is it? I haven't slept in the next 3 years, so I can't even know. Why am I not seeing this? There we go, sorry. Okay,
So Tom, do you want to just give the quick background overview of what this is?
yeah, so BRIC grant is a federal grant, 80% federal, 20% local match. We were encouraged to apply for this by the State Department of Emergency Management. I hope that's an encouraging sign. Not only did they encourage us to apply for it, but they took what they knew about our hydrology, the hydrology study we've talked about, and all the alternatives, and essentially filled out the form online for us. Which is hopefully a good sign. I do want to say, I know obviously there's been chatter about federal spending in the last week. My position is if there are federal grants available, we apply for them. Plain and simple. And Roy is the hydrologist who works for SOR Consulting. Roy under, I believe Malone and, I'm sorry, is it Malone and McBroom?
Yep.
Yeah, he did a hydrology study for the town, and so the BRIC grant essentially takes that study but furthers it. So it's from the ice center down to Forest Field, and we go up Thatcher Brook. Further, the previous study stopped at the interstate, and this would go up to the area of Leland Flats. And then there's alternatives that would be considered as a part of this. So what Roy has explained to me in layman's term, and I'll probably butcher it, is that once he does the base hydrology modeling, it's possible to do plug and play scenarios. An example I'll give is the study post Irene did not reveal that there was any substantial benefit to any substantial blockage caused by the bridge. When the base modeling, the Municipal Street Bridge, when the base modeling is done, that could be examined again. And I also understand that there's better modeling tools now. In the last decade, technology's come a long way. This also looks at the storm sewer issue that we have where now gravity, Skip Flanders and the EFUD board loves to say that gravity is free. It's wonderful because our water sources come from gravity-fed springs on that. Gravity is not so wonderful when the river is higher than your storm source and you back up Main Street and other places. So this looks at that issue and see if there's some way to address that. Roy, hopefully I did that justice.
Yeah, no, that was good. I think one other thing I would add is that the parameters around a bunch of the areas have changed. I think the cornfield was, in our first study, we looked at a very small change there. Same with around the ice center, and with all the flooding, we've said we would look, there's more opportunity to do, more substantial flood storage in those areas, and that will impact the downstream end of a lot of the outlet pipes, storm pipes that come through the town center. So yeah, I think that was good. And if you'd like, I can show a map of the layout, or I can talk through the tasks or answer questions, whatever folks would like.
I'm gonna go with more is more, Roy. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here. So if you're willing, I think all of the above would be great. And Tom, if you stop
So
your
I
share.
gotta stop the share.
Okay.
I've got to.
Maps are always great. We get requests all the time. So
All right, sounds good. Let's see if I just yep, got it. Let me hit share. Oops, that is not, I was doing some other work. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what I'll do is just talk through a flood study. And yes, Tom, like the world of hydraulic modeling is kind of changing in the past decade. We used to have to survey cross sections and do one-dimensional modeling, and now we can do two-dimensional modeling very quickly. And this is a footprint. In the upper left corner, you can barely see Bolton Falls Dam. This is zoomed way out. Here's the sewage treatment plant. Forest Field to the left, I missed that one, sewage treatment plant, state cornfield, state complex, ice center, country club golf course up at the top. And what this outline shows is we've been scoping this project with a company out of Linden called Whiteout Solutions, and they fly this drone with a LiDAR, a way to do survey that actually can see through water. So we can quickly survey this whole thing. Whereas in the past, we were cutting cross sections, so it was very time consuming to set up these models. It still takes a little time. You're more dealing with data processing. And like Tom said, once you get this set up, we can start evaluating things quite differently. And I think the exciting thing for me is there was some flood mitigation benefit around the ice center, the upper field, as well as the cornfield. But we were told to sort of, when we did our first study, it was stay close to the river, the cornfield staying in production. And now we've heard that there's potential opportunity to really change that. And we think this will be a big benefit for particularly some of the most flooded areas along Randall Street and in that area. So really hoping to get the chance to look at that. So data collection is how you start all this. We have a good start on the modeling to build on, so that helps. And then we have a whole list of alternatives. I should say, in addition to the BRIC funding, we've been prepping with the town to submit hazard mitigation grant funds as well. And the state said this might be a little bit of a better opportunity. So we're sort of diverting and going into that. But as long as there's opportunities, as Tom said, we should apply. It's essentially, I don't want to say it's free money, nothing's free, but it's essentially big pots of money designed to help towns evaluate and even implement these flood mitigation projects. So once we would get the modeling all set up, updated. The model extent will be quite bigger, and then this model will be available for future use. There are parts of the state that are, like in Lamoille, they have a long model that goes up through many communities, and then people are testing alternatives. So when something comes up in a specific town, all you'd have to do is do some local survey and plug it into this monster model, and then you could really evaluate things. So this will be a tool for the future, for the town to use, as well as test mitigation alternatives now. I think I'm gonna hop over to the test budgets. So the LiDAR survey with the drone is about a $50,000 budget for that. And then we also would partner with Grenier Engineering, who we work with a lot, and that would be some on the ground survey to make sure we got elevations right on some of the storm infrastructure, as well as other areas around. Do some data collection, create a GIS map, update the hydraulic modeling and the hydrology. So, unfortunately, we have good flood data of floods coming through the Winooski River in central Vermont. So we would update those values and then replicate the floods and use that to validate the model. And then we would explore the river alternatives, the pipe alternatives, do some floodplain mapping so you could see how things would change. And then we would take the preferred alternative of one or some combination of changes and then create a concept design. And that would really set the stage for either another grant to implement that design, or if it was a second phase of the project, depending on how this actually gets funded. Sometimes they do what's called a phased project approach, where you do the study first and then do the final design second. So that could be another route of how this thing gets funding. And then we would just report on all that. So kind of a quick summary. I think I'll pause there and see if folks have questions. And
Thank you very much. Any questions from the groups?
Just a clarification. On your spreadsheet, where you have the blue line under yourself, Brian and Doug, there's 240, 215, and 190. What do those numbers represent?
oh, those are like our rates.
Those are the rates.
Coincidentally, crew having their first meeting of their mitigation committee tonight as well. And their scope includes Middlesex, Moortown, Bolton. I'm just wondering, are you also working with those communities in your initiative?
We are not. We are working with a lot of different communities on various phases of flood mitigation. Just trying to think if we've done, I mean, we've done projects in those communities, but we're not specifically working on flood mitigation work. Or that may not be part of this. The one thing I'd say is we have had some initial talks with Vermont Emergency Management about a large modeling effort to spend down some surplus state money coming through some grant to do the whole Upper Winooski model. And there's been a lot of activity in the headwater towns upstream of Montpelier, Cabot, Plainfield, Marshfield. So, you know, in the back of my head, ideally, if depending on how all the funding moves and the towns get supported, like eventually these models all come together to help sort of a bigger region of the state. But right now, I think we've scoped this specifically for Waterbury and to answer some of the local flood mitigation questions that have kind of come up.
The extent to which this proposed scope overlapped with the previous scope, my impression is this is a broader scope because of additional funding opportunity, but can you just clarify?
Yeah, so definitely it's a much bigger scope. One thing, because the model setup was a little more difficult to do with like right now, we have a state LiDAR data set that really is pretty good for the floodplains, and we'll verify that. And then if we fly this green LiDAR to get under the water, we have the river channels. So before, what we did was we went out, us as well as a surveyor subconsultant at Granier went out and like did cross sections around a little bit around the ice center and then through town. But then we extended the model a little upstream and downstream, but it's an approximate model. We extended it down to Bolton Falls Dam because that dam does influence how water moves through the Winooski and flood. So you have to kind of have the dam in the model so the water level's sitting at the right starting condition when you put a flood into the system. So that model is a little more approximate. So the one thing I'd say is the level of detail of the entire model is going to improve a lot. So we can answer maybe just the state of the art is getting a little more detail. We can answer some questions better about what could the potential flood mitigation benefits be if we excavated certain amounts on the cornfield and a couple amounts on, you know, up at the ice center. So, and how would the shape of the floodplain change because we'll be looking in 2 dimensions rather than 1 dimension cross section. So.
Just to be clear, I'm not sure I understood your question. When you said prior, did you mean the study that Roy and his firm did post Irene, or do you mean when we applied for hazard mitigation?
I mean, for when we apply for hazard mitigation.
So this was essentially part of the hazard mitigation pre-act, but that was, they weren't looking for this level of detail. It was really conceptual. And then, you know, what they had said was we will call you to submit full applications based on the pre-app and how they rank them internally.
Roger?
Just wondering if there's any clear timeline in terms of when this grant is due, when it's likely to get paid, if at all, and when the study could be done.
It's due late February, I forget the exact date, but it's substantially written, so submitting it is not a challenge. I certainly can't tell you a timeline as to when it will be approved. What I will say is there's a 20% match here, and that's for us, that would be $33,312. That is not in the 2025 budget, nor does it need to be. Because I do not see substantial elements of this work occurring this year because all my experience with federal grants and vested circumstances are that it's a time consuming process to get to a contract. Roy has said to me previously that the LiDAR certainly requires the leaves to be off the trees, so that really implies late this year when that early phase would start being done, I think. So I think I'm hopeful we get it quick, but I'm not concerned about not having the matching funds in this year's budget. Let's put it that way. Roy might have a different experience with federal grants, but in my experience, they are not quick.
Nope. And even a little more uncertainty right now, as you expressed earlier, so.
Other board members, I see Amy online and then Chris in the room. We'll go to Amy.
Hi, good evening. I didn't get a chance to catch that map fully, so I wanted a question about scope. Specifically, are you looking at tributaries that are leading into the Winooski, or how far up are you
I'll share
thinking?
my screen again.
And is there a way to get that scope analysis kind of in these documents relative to the meeting minutes for this meeting too? And thank you for revisiting. Okay.
Can you see the map? Okay.
I can, thank you.
Yeah, so Thatcher, and I think it even is going to go up a little further than is shown on here, and we were planning to kind of extend with some in the field survey and using some of the existing LiDAR. This is the green LiDAR extent, so that's the type of information that can see into the water, and so it expedites having to survey the channel, but we can massage this a little bit. So really it's Thatcher, Graves, Thatcher Brook, and the Winooski main stem is the proposal right now.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
Other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Christina, and then Bill.
I'm just put this together in a nutshell for myself. Based on the volatility of these storms and the severity of them in perhaps different locations, this grant effort, does it take a look at many different type models of storms in different areas and how they impact like the town of Waterbury? And do you have any past reference projects that you've done that have come to a conclusion where you propose some mitigation efforts that have made any substantial difference at all, or what degree of difference have they had, if any?
Yeah. So your first question about the changing hydrology and how there's a lot of variability, and how do you put that in the model? So the first answer is yes, we put in small floods, medium floods, and large floods. And then in particular, when you have two river systems like Thatcher and Graves versus the main stem Winooski, right? You're in 300 to 400 square miles of watershed on the main stem Winooski, and in Thatcher, you're in a much smaller watershed in a different location. So sometimes you have a very intense storm in the tributaries, more like what we saw in 2024, July. And then sometimes the main stems flood more like we saw in 2011 and July 2023. So we'll play those scenarios out of Thatcher coming down and hitting a wall of water on the Winooski, as well as Thatcher really having what past is called the 500-year flood, a very large flood hitting nothing, so it's very erosive. We look at those as well. You bring up a really good point. The intensity storms feels like it's changing a bit, and we're doing some gauge analysis with the river gauges right now on the Winooski to understand, like we're seeing like 20 to 30% increases in what we're calling the 100-year flood if you just look at the more modern part of the gauge record. So what we would do is take like a climate change flood as well as the traditional calculated flood for, say, the 100-year flood, and the climate change flood, which is just using the post-1970 data where we see some big changes in our gauges, that is would be quite larger. So we would do all the tricks we can to really try to explore that volatility and variability we're seeing in the floods. We can certainly provide examples of past projects. The stories get a little complicated when you ask what is their benefit. Like, for example, we did a floodplain restoration in downtown Northfield at Water Street along the Dog River, trip of the Winooski that they joined in Montpelier. And the Dog is a very volatile stream, high elevation headwaters that can really get going in a tributary flood. And they said that in the 24 flood, their flood levels were a foot to half a foot lower than they saw previous years, a similar size flood. And we've also done some floodplain restoration along the Whetstone Brook in the Brattleboro area, and same thing, like having less evacuations around these floodplain reconnections. And even in the original choke studies, it was called in Waterbury, we said that you could drop the water levels 1 to 2 feet in an Irene-sized flood. So in these really big floods, we still often see flooding and floodplain inundation for the biggest floods. In smaller to moderate floods, if you can knock the flooding down a bit, then that's where you can avoid some of those damages. So it kind of varies by town. I could probably, if you're really interested, I can dig up a few examples and share them with the town and try to tease apart some of the benefits. It's a quick summary. We've kind of done this sort of work all over the state. Recently, Montgomery, Linden, Barry, Montpelier. So a lot of communities are looking for flood mitigation projects right now for try to get some federal funding attached to them in the wake of the disasters.
Billy, you want to give them?
I'm Billy Bigdor, and I have 3 comments, go from the micro to macro. Number one, I can't tell on the map, and I know you're going up toward the inner flats, but will you do where Thatcher Brook crosses Twin Peaks? The reason why I ask is because the July flood last year turned an 8-foot wide clear into a 5-foot deep trench right now. It just basically dredged it. And I'm really worried about the fact that the speed of the water right around there will be very quick. So I don't know how far north or east or how far you go, but I think you want to get to Twin Peaks on Thatcher. So
Okay, I'll make a note of that.
yeah.
Graves or Thatcher?
No, that's Thatcher. Graves is further east than Ontario. Graves together, area, together. Is there any part of this study, or should we do something independently about the debris that's filling up the culverts? Some of the problems we had, I think it was Hollow and on Henry Hub, was the debris from the woods basically clogged the culverts, and then everything kind of wiped out. I don't know, doesn't sound like a hydrology study for me, so if it's not in this, should there be a parallel effort to think about that? I'm not sure we'll fix it.
Yeah. So the debris has been coming up a lot. And there are these models, hydraulic model operates in clear flow unless you do sediment transport and debris modeling. That said, like, we've been doing a lot of consideration of debris, like looking at past flood information and then blocking the culverts or bridges or channels with the same level of debris to try to simulate what happens. And the idea is that when you upsize culverts to the bankful width of the channel, you create enough vertical space, then you create space for debris to come through these structures. We've done some studies with UVM. As long as the structures aren't hydraulically full, they pass a lot of debris if they're a certain size and larger, and they have a little bit of extra space called freeboard. So we'd certainly evaluate that as part of this at the culverts and bridges in the modeling, to understand, where there are likely debris spots. Like, we've already looked at a couple culverts with the town on Grays Brook and Thatcher that seemed to, that clogged up, and they're all pretty much undersized and need to be enlarged so they can handle a certain debris load in a big flood.
And my third comment is more to the select board. When you look at the town survey that we just did and look at flood mitigation as being one of the 5 kind of negatives, people are frustrated by it. Think about it. There was a lot of discussions about we're going to do something at the cornfield. And the cornfield, I think there was always a perception the cornfield would be the be all and end all solution. I'm not sure I believe that. But I think there was a town expectation we're going to do the cornfield, and it's going to help a lot. And we've been told about the hydraulic study. Now we're talking about basically neither of these 2 big things happening till 26. And I think the town is going to get very frustrated, particularly if we have a storm and a problem. And somehow, we'll leave it to you guys, but I think some communication needs to be done to get out in front of it. And if it's not these big things, maybe we need to look at some plans B, C, and D that are less big money intensive, things that are a little bit smaller, things that came out of our talking sessions that maybe we could do to kind of get going on, secondary projects, but still maybe helpful. So,
Thank you so much, Billy.
thanks.
Right, I think points well taken. In terms of next steps on this particular item, Tom, would you want an authorization from the select board for the grant application as presented?
Yes.
Is there any motions with that regard? A motion to approve the submission of the Waterbury brick grant application for the flood mitigation study as presented.
Someone. I'll settle it.
Kane moved the motion and Roger seconded it, which I'll just note, we've gone through the outline, the scope of work. This does have a budget of $166,000. And I'll just say personally, point well taken with regards to what's a town item and what timeline this would be for a federal grant application that would provide an 80% match. For this particular funding source, we're noting that the local match would not be needed likely until later. Any other discussion, Mike?
Should we have, I'll make a friendly amendment that we could have in the motion that it's for $166,560.
I already seconded the original motion. I was just wondering.
I suppose.
One could argue that's part of the presentation, but I digress.
That was what I was gonna argue, that I'm not gonna die on that.
We're not a super technical crew. Any other comments or discussion on this item in the motion?
One question for Roy while he's here. Just wonder, Roy, we've been challenged by projections of flooding and how much we can expect during these situations, and they've been off by 2 or more feet. The last one in December was right on the money, so I'm just wondering if those projections are indeed getting better, and if you have an idea as to why they were so far off in 2 or 3 floods earlier.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the gentleman's comment about the variability. When the model we built for the choke study, the USGS took that model, surveyed and expanded, put the staff gauge up on the bridge by the ice center coming into town, and then created this like bathtub model that you fill and then you predict the levels. And then they said, well, at a certain level, it hits Randall Street. At the next level, it hits Main Street and so on. And then they create these patterns, right? And then you have to predict how much water comes in, how's it going to fill the bathtub, and then you have your prediction. What's happened in the last 2 Julys is that we've got some really different kinds of flooding, even than Irene, right? In 23, we had like a broader flood that kind of filled some headwaters and then hit all the main stems pretty hard. In 24, we had a really high intensity, low duration flood in the tributaries. That sort of flood behaves a little differently when it gets onto the main river. So this variability, I think the prediction mechanisms are a little harder. When you have like what I call a standard flood, it doesn't come super quick. The atmosphere isn't super saturated. You don't see like 9 inches of rain in Cabot, right? Because then you have all these incredible inputs from all over the place coming at this gauge and merging, and then the result is the pattern you see in Waterbury. So I think when you see like a normal atmosphere, meaning it's not high, super hot, super saturated, and you get normal intensities of rainfall, you can start to be more confident in the predictions. Like the last smaller flood that came through the Winooski, the predictions were much more accurate. The predictions were jumping all over hour to hour because the prediction of the rain inputs was really complicated. And then how those very spotty sharp peaks merged into the Winooski was kind of all over the place. You had two difficult things. I think this is going to evolve. Like there's going to be better predictive models to try to sort through some of this variability. Not a great answer, but that's kind of where we're at, is trying to keep up with the prediction methods with some of these high variable storms.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Then keeping track correctly, we have an amended motion by Kane, seconded by Roger, on the submission of this work study for $166,560. Is there any further discussion on that? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Right, authorization to submit this. Thank you, Tom, and thanks to DEM. Thank you, Roy, for being here tonight and for your expertise. And fingers crossed, and I'll just name, we have additional discussion of future agendas, and so as to plans and communication for flooding might be an apt item. All right, anything else on this item? All right, I will move us to our next one, which is Downtown Transportation Fund application. This is another grant application. Tom is going to talk us through. The deadline is the date of our next regular meeting, February 17th, but it's at 5 p.m. So we need to do some preliminary review and approval tonight to ensure we can get it submitted.
Just a minute here.
Gonna go get the resolution we have to sign.
This is involving quickly. I'm just pulling it up and I'll share my screen again. We had just to give a little background, the grants, it's a pretty tight timeline between when the grants are announced as available and when they're awarded. And the first step is you have to give your brainstorm of ideas to historic preservation, which we've done. Had a meeting with Revitalizing Waterbury, Public Works, and brainstormed ideas. And this is not complete. What we've talked about in general with Public Works is paving Bidwell, including the parking lot, which we've committed to anyway as the Methodist Church. Sorry, paving Bidwell is part of this. Paving Methodist Church parking lot, which we've committed to do at some point when that MOU is signed. We currently have 5 lampposts. Bidwell and Foundry, replacing those to match the rest of the newer lampposts in the downtown. Putting in additional sidewalks, which we don't have. 175 feet of sidewalk. We've also talked about a crosswalk, and that is not listed here, but that is in the range of $15,000 to $18,000, and we've had talked about a couple locations and we've had prior discussions about that. There was some thought about having a crosswalk towards the south end of our designated downtown. There's been a lot of talk, also talk about having it in the north end here. The challenge here is the designated downtown ends with this building. It does include the 2 vacant homes across the road. But I was told that it's not both sides of the street. He may be out of luck, and more likely to be out of luck. So we've talked about one coming off the roundabout, and that's outside of the downtown. Certainly could consider a crosswalk right in front of town hall or in this area. But the budget here puts to $224,000. We've also have not yet added in wayfinding, which was one of the ideas that we discussed, and that's the essentially the restaurants off of Main and Stowe Streets are a little more hidden, and having some signage to help direct customers there may would be useful. I don't have an exact one for that, but I think it's in the range of $3,000 to $5,000. But if we added that to the crosswalk, we are in the $240,000 range, give or take. The grant has a maximum of $20,000. And so we have to relatively quickly play a little bit of triage here to figure out what has the most support. So that's where we're at now with the unfortunately abbreviated timeline to get an application in. Sorry, this is $224,000. The $24,000 comes out because the paving in Methodist Church lot is not eligible. So we're at 200, but if we add in signage and we add in the crosswalks, we're back in that 220 range again. This is another grant that I don't believe we need matching funds this year, just to be clear about that. We will certainly need matching funds. We have previous downtown grants, and our match has primarily been public works later, and that our crew can do some of the work related to the lamp posts. They can do some of the work related to the sidewalks. And typically that's essentially gotten us towards the finish line, and we're very, very close. The other piece I will add is finding these lamp posts is difficult. We still have a few that we haven't put in, and that grant was awarded, I think, a couple of years before I got here. I think we're pretty close there. It's been a saga of the lamp posts. So I think this grant, if awarded, I think the work would take place over a couple of years.
So in terms of for tonight, the municipal have this funding. I'll just note we're eligible for it because we have a designated downtown. So it's one of the things that is important in terms of the funding we provide to RW that allows us to keep having this. It requires the 20% match. Tom, you're saying that often we've been able to use existing staff time for that match as opposed to needing to budget it. I have a printout here from the application. So it's whereas the municipality of Waterbury is applying for the funding, that it may offer a grant agreement if we get it. And saying that we would agree to provide the 20% match. We would also need to get signed off from Martha as the chair of the planning commission to support it. But it would say our decision tonight is, do we support a grant application to be finalized by Tom, Public Works, the planning commission for a scope that includes considerations such as lampposts, crosswalks, paving, sidewalk improvements, and it has to be in that designated downtown area. Am I missing anything?
No, and we will work to pare down the scope to be right at that $200,000 range. And there are options. Currently, there are 5 lamp posts. We'd like to add a 6th, but we can stay at 5. Some of this work is unfortunate. The base is simply needed to be replaced, so we have to do that.
Questions or comments from the board on this? Roger?
I'm gonna use myself, because, RW oversees the downtown program. for Waterbury.
So we have a municipal resolution for the downtown transportation fund. So we will be looking for someone to make a motion to approve that resolution and then those not opposed or abstaining to sign it. Does anyone want to offer that motion?
I move to approve the resolution related to downtown transportation. Correct.
Works for me.
Second.
All right, so motion seconded by Ann to approve this municipal resolution for the downtown transportation fund. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Roger said he's abstaining. So those who have not abstained, I would also ask for your signature on this. Again, acknowledging that the final application will be finalized by town staff and that this will also need to go to the planning commission for their sign off. Right, any other discussion? It's exciting. All right, Tom, so you can probably pull that down now. And we are moving on to our next item, which is the ethics policy. We had printouts of this in our packet. It is 5 pages. I don't know if anyone would like to take some time now to review it. My understanding is this is prescribed directly by statute. So we previously took action at previous meetings to assign the municipal manager by position with the select board chair by position as an alternate as the designated folks. But there also was a component around a code of ethics, which is what we have before us tonight.
Correct, this is 100% prescribed by statute, so this effectively replaces your policy. As of January 1st. That being said, it is not dramatically different from your policy. One of the most important information pertains to the conflict of interest section, which is in the very first page. And that's, I think, a very standard definition that is pretty consistent with what we do. Just scrolling down to a few other pieces beyond the definitions. So once again, the conflict of interest issue speaks to not just the conflict, but the appearance. It also in essence requires that a public statement be made when you recuse, just Roger just did, which is not a super high bar. It also has, I think, a reasonable definition of what's not a conflict: amorphous, intangible, otherwise speculative. So I think this policy, to be blunt, creates a few challenges because of its broadness at the same, and it's going to be difficult to simply not make an unforced error because it's new policy before they get acquainted with. My suggestion is we all simply keep a copy front and center of us at every meeting and just try to review the agenda with that in mind. The prohibited conduct is, again, nothing unique, nothing you wouldn't expect to see in an ethics policy. Some additional clauses that we don't have in ours: misuse of information, misuse of resources. Our policy is more focused on the conflict issue. So some of these definitions, I think, are useful. But nothing earth-shattering, nothing that dramatically different. But again, a policy, a law enacted by the state, for better or worse, imposed on state. Any questions about this? There will be training that we will all have to have, including some other municipal officers, and that's it's required training, but it's not available to us yet. So Ian may like that.
Other questions or comments on this?
You'll see three make notes about.
They've They've got an entire section in the website now, which gives some additional guidance. The LCT preferred to allow towns to adopt their own policies.
We do have an existing conflict of interest policy that this would necessitate
So-
superseding it.
Yes, and so those policies are typically adopted in the first meeting after town meeting day, and they'll have to make some adjustments.
So for tonight, we would be looking for a motion to adopt the municipal code of ethics.
It's been adopted for you, but I suggest a motion anyway
Okay.
to affirm it.
Does someone know how to say the legal citation relevant to these chapters? For fancy?
It is right on the very top.
Section 22 of 24 of VSA, chapter 16. 1991 definitions. I'm clearly not a lawyer, so I don't know how one says this.
Thank you. Section 1991, our paralegal and training, legal studies.
Here I was thinking, damn, these were written a long time ago.
Roger?
I'll move that we adopt section 22, 24 VSA chapter 60, section 1991 as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, come on.
So, as I understand it, I guess we have to adopt it this way. I assume we can adopt it more tightly if we want. I want to flag a couple of things that if I was on the board and given I'm going to be subject to this because I'm on the planning commission, there are some things that do kind of just raise some questions for lack of clarity. For instance, what is it? Conflict of interest is not only an interest, it's direct or indirect. So what is an indirect interest in a matter? How will I ever figure that out? And how will we not be fighting over that? Because if someone wants to recuse someone, it's negligence. Then it has to be a known conflict, but in the law, there's two kinds of knowledge. There's constructive and there is actual. And constructive knowledge means you should have known. So I should have known I had an indirect interest in something that applies to a family member. Right? It can really what's going on here. I do feel though that in some other places though, it is too loose because it only has an affiliate for business associates. Rather, so for instance, if I'm on the board of Winterfest, Winterfest would not be a business associate of mine, but if we came for money and I was on the select board, that would not be a conflict of interest. Whereas I think when we're on volunteer boards, I think we should play this. So if Winterfest comes for money and I'm on the select board, I should recuse myself. But I wouldn't have to under this policy. That doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing, the recusal, it's a weird recusal. It says that you shouldn't act to influence, but you can participate. Whereas the current policy that we have, you can't participate. You have to step out of the room. So, and then of course, if there is a conflict, there's actually no remedy whatsoever. There's no going back to the officer that didn't have it. There's no second guessing the decision. I don't know who drafted it. I don't know what you do with it, but I think I take your point that you have to have it in front of you, but what do you do? I think it's really, I think it's kind of counterproductive. Because a good conflict of interest policy, in my view, is one where you know as a board and I know as a town member what a conflict is so that we know when we see it and then we deal with it. That's not what this is. So that's totally, that might be totally counterproductive. I don't know what to say.
Points well taken. I think, I'll just say from where we're at, this was something we were required to have, but I think we're hearing that if there's a way we could further clarify or outline procedure,
I'll say, I think I can speak for the board. None of us want to have real or perceived conflicts of interest. We've had not long ago discussion about what that looks like and how we can do our best as a board to remedy it. And as volunteer elected officials, we are doing our best to do so. So I appreciate your engagement, and thanks.
And on one point, one of the phase 2 issues we'll have to do at some point is have to adopt procedures for investigating the conflict. And that I think creates additional difficulty because I certainly can't investigate a conflict at the board. Perhaps you can.
Well, I'll point out, I think it's actually a conflict because you all have an interest, a direct interest in the outcome. Just kind of think that. Talk to the legislature.
We had a motion and a second, if I recall correctly.
Discussion after Lisa.
I was thinking the same thing myself.
Yeah. Right?
Just a clarification, I think when Roger made the motion, he just referred to 1991. Which I. Is that just?
And 1993.
Where I think it should read chapter 60, municipal code of ethics, and that would cover all the subsections.
So if you say section 42, 24 GSA.
Or you could do it that way, all those subs.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, we just didn't, so clarity. Section 22, 24 VSA, chapter 6.
I think you should say chapter 60, sections 1991 through 1993.
Sections 1991 to 1993.
So motion from Roger to adopt those sections, second.
Was second. Okay, we need to re-second? Second.
I'm just re-clarifying, motion and second. Any other discussion on this? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. This, sorry, I'm making note about future discussion, including the items that were just noted. All right, so our next item is board committee and then.
Sorry, I had a
Yeah.
quick question. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure I understood that the ones that were reviewed today were limited. Does that mean that you folks will revisit the remaining sub chapters within chapter 60? So for example, like 1998, 1997.
Correct, yeah, the motion that
Okay.
was just viewed was 1991 through 1993.
And then you'll be revisiting others at a later time. Is that your plan? That's the
Correct.
question. All right, thank you.
Okay. So next we were at the 9 PM listed item, which was board committee and manager updates. Again, this is an informational sharing and update note of FYIs for folks to know prior to the next meeting. I guess I'll start. So one for the board logistically, we need to submit by Wednesday our report for the town report. We get an extra late deadline, thanks to Karen. Roger has prepared his portion of it, which is almost all of it. I will add and circulate that to everyone tonight, but essentially if you have feedback, you need to respond and email it tomorrow. Any edits for that, so you can get it to Karen by Wednesday. Of a more general nature, third plug now that the first workshop in the housing task force build an accessory dwelling unit workshop. It's February the 11th, that's a Tuesday, 6 to 8 PM, all about the zoning and permitting needs, both locally. So our town planning and zoning staff will be there, and also the state fire marshal. So if you're thinking of adding on to your house, please do. It will be recorded and available on Zoom. I think that's all I have. Yeah.
Nothing this week, hopefully for next week, I'll have an update.
Nothing additional.
Roger?
Oh, someone else gave my update today.
Pretty long one, yeah.
Tom?
I just want to say, the UVM student project, had my second meeting with them today with Bill Woodruff. They actually came here. to the cornfield. We walked through the knee-deep snow. Accidentally ran go through our right of way. But they have a few weeks yet until they submit, to their, essentially their final problem statement, what they want to study, but it sounds like they want to look at cornfield as, the flood storage capability of the cornfield if it's, turned into a natural wetland without losing recreational trails. Which I think is a pretty interesting and good thing to study, because that could be a component of the project there. So,
If it turns into what, I'm sorry.
if it's, I shouldn't say turns into, if it's made into a natural wetland.
All right. Anything else, Tom? Feel free to stop your share. Okay. If there's no other updates, I will move to review next meeting agenda. I've been scribbling my own notes about flood roles and communication, municipal ethics, but any specific agenda items for board members for our next meeting.
Could we potentially get PSP leadership in the next meeting?
We'll check.
Other items for the next agenda. I'm gonna propose, I guess, given the recommendation from not today that we could make the umbrella as broad as we want, but do we want a select board discussion around natural disaster preparedness and flood recovery roles and communications? I guess I'll note this isn't the first time we've heard this conversation about what are you all doing? What's the plan? I think the more coherent we have that ahead of time meeting for that. Tom, I'm gonna put, do you think we're gonna have an ethics policy by then or not?
You have it.
No, I mean, sorry, the stage 2 portion you just referred to, or I'm not getting.
I'm behind in a lot of things and hoping we can push off a couple of things. Well, moving after.
Parking lot it is. Any other items for that?
We'd probably be ready, not with numbers per se, but if people wanted to give us some marching orders on sidewalks for the specific sections, specific neighborhoods that you want us to start thinking about, is it more of a 2026 you want to consider devoting a significant portion of the budget to it? We can have that conversation with Woodruff if interested.
Sidewalks was in the parking lot, so we'll move it out.
Find out while we're talking about sidewalks, should we find out, well, before that discussion, why the sidewalks were removed from the street? Because I've heard from that neighborhood. Sidewalks would be a welcome addition. Back like it was removed from the street. I know, I wonder if it's in the town records. As to why they were.
And the last I'll propose is a review of committee liaisons. I know I've been overdue multiple times in recognizing that I'm not doing a great job as a liaison to the planning commission, mostly because we've been meeting at the same time of their meetings, but I think again, as some housekeeping before town meeting, a re-review of what we see that role as and a re-review of what committees we have covered with what board members. 5 items. Anything else that feels pressing? Otherwise, I will say, now that we're moving back to a bi-weekly regular meeting schedule, my plan will be to meet with Tom weekly to review items. But I've been hoping for Thursday meetings in hopes of having some Friday buffer time to finalize the agenda, but we'll keep you all posted regarding the development. That being said, if things come up this week, please be in touch because we won't finalize it until closer to the 17th.
Just for clarification, Since we are meeting on the Tuesday of town meeting, or we're not meeting the night before.
Great question. Thoughts from the board, my understanding is we would not be meeting the Monday before town meeting as often, but thank you, you added, most importantly, on the 17th, we have to do our script review for town meeting.
Oh,
And
yes.
that's gonna be right before, because we did the assignments, but we didn't have the document in front of us, so last month it was always that.
And that is, we are meeting on holiday.
Oh, thank you, yes, we are planning on meeting on the 17th. To Roger's point, the Monday before town meeting, I would say it has not been past practice of the board, but open to. Yeah,
I would just say, meeting on the 17th, that's the only reason I think we would get our house more for the next day, but see if there's any reason not to do that.
They're not sure why.
I would say in practice, the school district has often had their informational meeting that night, so I will say it has been a conflict previously if we had chosen to meet.
No, I want to know what the school board has to say.
Right, we'll be there. All right, so I'm hearing from the board that our first meeting in March will be town meeting on the 4th, a day after what would be our regularly scheduled meeting. And we'll update the next agenda. Right, any other next meeting agenda items? All right, now I will own up to my goof in my copy and pasting of this delightful last two agenda items. I will note that the 925, the statute citation, which I cannot say but can copy correctly. 1 VSA 313A2 real estate purchase option is correct. That is not one that requires a specific premature finding. Specific finding is not relevant to that. And again, I was copying and pasting. But if the board was interested, this would be a time to enter executive session. To consider matters related to a real estate purchase option. I will note that on the agenda, we have potential action listed in public session, which we do not anticipate will actually happen after further legal review.
Okay. I move to enter executive session for discussion of real estate purchase options.
Right, motion and second to enter executive session for real estate purchase options. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we will move into executive session at 9:12.